Hello, and welcome back to episode 4 of Veridian County, our realistic Pacific Northwest themed city here in City Skylines 2. In today's episode, I want to begin the foundations for our downtown, with placeholder buildings all throughout to shape our skyline. In the process, we'll continue our road grid throughout the region and begin to add highway exits to serve our primary downtown area. Once we've done that, we'll start work on Greater Grand Central, a master-planned tourism district, serving the future stadium area and acting as the hub of hotels for our city. Before we dive into the work that we want to do today, let's begin with an episode recap. In the last episode, we began work on Old Road Bay, named after an old horse trail that used to snake from the ferry terminal to the mountains of Verdant State Park. Now, it's the city's major cargo trade district, with the first subway and train yards, 2 cargo harbors, a cargo trade terminal, an incineration plant, and more. We then expanded the farming areas that we'd begun in the previous episodes through the island that will eventually have the city of Brightwater, establishing plots of land that will shape the area's future development patterns. And we finished the episode by creating district names throughout the map, in line with our planning that was completed in the first episode. We began to give these areas names, and I'm always open to more suggestions. In today's episode, I want to begin work on our downtown area by placing a number of major buildings throughout. I really want to set the scene of downtown Lemuria, understanding why each of our districts exist, why the roadways exist as they do, and begin to create a little bit of a skyline for ourselves. Effectively, this process means that I'll be looking through Find It at nearly every single building available and seeing if I can find a place for them to be plopped down. I'm going to want to include a number of our signature buildings that we have, particularly those that are taller, monumental, or really make a difference on a city's skyline and the development of a region. As the major city of our downtown, I want to make sure that we're not missing out on these unique opportunities to draw in some tourism and add more visual interest to our skyline than the typical buildings just look like. Before we begin to place any buildings in downtown, though, it's important to understand the implications that this will have on our infrastructure network. We already have 2 main interchanges coming off of I-67, the interstate that runs through our downtown, but this is certainly not enough for the entire region. Understanding that we're going to be creating more roads that draw out and fill out this area up here, which I'm calling Nodo for north of downtown, plus all of these areas around the hill, we're going to need a number more exits just to fuel each of these different areas. I want to make sure that we have at least 1 or 2 off-ramps right here at our curve to serve the Marina District. Our Waters District is somewhat well served from this interchange, but our Central Business District is probably going to need some exits of its own, whether those are the same ones that come off the curb or maybe something in the middle over there. And of course, Nodo plus this little area of downtown are going to need to be served by some sort of interchange, and I'm thinking we'll probably take this Glade Street up and over the highway and turn that into an interchange too. If we're getting all those interchanges in, we then need to be thinking about increasing the widths of our streets. Assuming that these roads have to handle downtown traffic plus our tram line that we've got, these can't just be 2-lane roads. A number of them are going to need to be upgraded to 4 or even 6-lane roads to make way for the amount of traffic that we want to have downtown and to make sure the streets don't feel too cramped. I think as a downtown area, it's going to be important to have primarily 4-lane roads running through here so things don't get too cramped. But I want things to be a little bit more unique, so I'm not just going to go ahead and upgrade all of these roads to 4-lane. Let's say that we have interchanges over here for both sides of the highway, over here for the southbound side, and over here for the northbound side. Maybe here for the northbound, and here for the southbound, and then here again for the northbound. Something like that. I think these interchanges can feed into this street, that street, probably both of these, maybe this one, and that one. Maybe both of these 2 for this interchange, that one over there, and then this one is a cross street in itself, and that'll feed from both sides of the highway. Downtown interchanges, I find, are very often not a typical interchange where it connects evenly on both sides into one singular intersection. In downtowns, very often, it's a little bit more confusing depending on the direction, especially for something that's like this, where we don't have a huge amount of space on either side of the highway to create massive turnarounds. Instead, these are going to be ramps that are kind of shoehorned in wherever they can be to fit into the downtown street grid. So if each of these arrows are basically our on and off ramps for our highway interchange, then I think we want to make sure that each of these streets are at minimum upgraded to 4 or 6-lane roads. Now, this isn't the neatest of diagrams, but you're starting to get the point. You're seeing how we're trying to think about traffic flow all throughout this area. We already have this waterfront and this divider right here that serve as collectors of sort for a lot of our traffic, but we're still going to need to think about different ways to make sure we're handling all of the potential throughput for these different areas. As I'm drawing these in more and more, you can see that almost all of these roads in some way interact with the highway network. And we probably want a lot of these to be 4 lanes. Once I actually get in game, I might use a little bit more deliberateness with my road selections, but this will be good for now. Now, if we're taking this Glade Street up and over the highway, then it's going to be important not to sever the connection to the rest of this region. So we're probably going to have yet another 4-lane road, maybe this one, that continues up and all around this mountain into these surrounding areas. While I'm doing that, I probably want to begin to draw out some of these other major roads throughout the region. They might not be final yet, and I might grow them, shrink them, move them around, anything like that, but it'll just help us to understand where things are going, where the rail is going, how everything connects up, and things like that. So let me come right back with you after I've created some of these interchanges. And here we are. You can see that our road grid downtown has changed just a little bit, not too much. A lot of these roads, as you saw, I was drawing them out in the little bit of a drawing that I pulled up. A lot of these roads have turned into 4-lane or even 6-lane roads to be able to handle the traffic from our new interchanges. Let's run through each of these, starting from the I-67 interchange that we have over here already, running northbound. As you come underneath the hill over here, there is an exit ramp that branches off in this tunnel, and that branches off underneath this pedestrian road before surfacing right here at the intersection of Hawthorne Street and Hawthorne Street. Again, City Skylines, my god. I, of course, need to clean up some of these junctions, but I want to do that once they're a little bit more solid. Right now, they're still in draft mode, basically. Then we just have an entrance ramp that snakes right back up and on in between the train lines and comes up here. Still moving northbound, we then pass the elevated subway station where the clearance is too close to have any sort of ramps, and once we get past there, at the intersection of Hawthorne and Hamilton Street, we have an entrance ramp that comes up, merges into the highway right over here, and an exit lane that then comes back down onto Hawthorne and Spruce. You can see that this exit lane doesn't actually have a dedicated turn because I want to keep the highway wide for this Belmont Highway split-off segment. Effectively, I'm doing what I've done in a couple of past segments and something that you'll see a lot in the real world, where the main highway continues, but you effectively get a separate exit branch of the highway, a parallel highway, a bypass highway of sorts, where the cars can switch lanes at a slower pace and not interrupt the flow of the main traffic on the highway. So this 4-lane highway branches off into a 3 and a 2. The 2-lane highway is our bypass highway that has one little interchange right here down to Alyssa Street running through our Marina district, and a second interchange onto Belmont Street on the opposite side of things. Both of these staying pretty flat with a little bit of retaining wall for this old cemetery ruins that's been here since we started the map. Then the bypass highway merges back up just in time for it to be carried up onto Champion Bridge, which is really a gateway bridge. I'm not going to rename that because names don't matter in this game. It doesn't work. This is basically our gateway bridge. This is the last major interchange for downtown, and it effectively signifies as you're driving along this highway, you're entering or leaving downtown. So it's our gateway. This road is at a diagonal, so the roads that are coming into it basically elevate to the same height and then turn in at a 90, because 90-degree intersections like this are the safest of all, according to the US Department of Transportation. That then, of course, comes back down onto our 4-lane, which narrows into a 3-lane to continue out of this area. Down the opposite side, it's a pretty similar story, especially coming up to Champion Bridge, except these are some pretty steep segments that are just retaining walls. It might change them to elevated at some point. But you've got the same principle where the exits and entrances come up at a 90 before coming back down. Then you've got a small, tiny little intersection right over here. Using that same exit lane, you have a small intersection that comes onto Spruce Street on the opposite end for this one, which we'll get to. Then there's no major downtown interchanges for a while in the central business district, which is, it's something that's fun. I think we'll get a little bit of feedback on that from the traffic patterns of the area. But then you get to a little bit of an interchange right over here that's a little bit more complicated between Green Street and the Hill, where it basically branches off into 2 pathways, one of which comes down onto Green Street, and the other of which comes up and over onto Spruce Street. So you get this pretty nice parallel to the highway movements running right through here. In the process of creating all these interchanges, I drew our subway line up and over this hill right here. This hill had a pretty natural valley, so I made sure the subway line was at the right elevation to run right through there. And I brought our arterial through a little bit of a tunnel so that it comes out the other side for our eventual civic center. I then added some depth to the street grids of Noto because we already had this gateway bridge intersection. So I just brought that up to a roundabout over here and brought First Avenue, or whatever it'll eventually be called, from the Marina district straight through intersect that with our other arterial right here, straight through, and then the point where the Gateway Bridge interchange and this First Avenue meet was just turned into a roundabout. From there, I branched one road off right in the middle that somewhat parallels this highway exit ramp, and that essentially sets our boundary for this Nodo district between First Avenue, this Myrtle Street over here, and our arterial Middle Street right there. This Nodo district has this highway interchange snaking through it, so I brought Myrtle Street over it with a little bit of a bridge. The grades did work out pretty well over here to have this 3-level stack. Myrtle Street then, of course, continues into the Marina District for our subway station. At the intersection over here, I wanted to have our arterial come out at a 180 rather than curving off to follow Middle Street, so I just brought Manor Street into there, and at the interchange created a little bit of a T-junction. Then I drew in a couple of other roads and alleys that just make their way up this hill over here. This is going to be a little bit hard to zone in with buildings, but I think some row homes might be able to handle the grade change the best. All of this work meant that we only really had 2 connections, being the Gateway Bridge and this arterial, to connect between the main downtown Marina District and all of Uptown and the Civic Center, so I just added in another cross street, Chester Street, which elevates itself right over here and comes up and over the highway to connect up with Nodo. So now we've got a fair few connections besides just the highway and these interchanges, and everything is working out pretty well. I also, as mentioned, began to draw out the roads that I wanted in these other areas. Since we have this area turning into an interchange, I brought Hamilton Street in over here as a 4 and then a 6-lane road that snakes up this little hillside parallel with this new rail line and comes up closer to Western Heights and Crescent City before snaking around Western Heights towards our Stadium District and this other interchange over here. We've also had Thornton Street since last episode and Hawthorne Street for a while, so I brought that straight through this roundabout to this interchange over here, put an elevated subway station where our subway tracks may or may not eventually run, and we've got ourselves a framework all around Valley Hill and Western Heights. We've got some roads. With all these roads in and all of these hoarding roads upgraded to 4 lanes where necessary to support the interchanges, we're in a pretty good place to begin placing in some buildings. The buildings will be able to fit right into these street grids where possible. They won't be too close together or too far apart. They'll fit right into all of these areas. So with our downtown grid upgraded, it's time to think about our city skylines. I said the name. It's happening. It's getting real now. Before we make such a major decision as this, as always, I want to take a look at some real-world precedent. I've mentioned in the past that I'm taking a lot of inspiration from Hong Kong, New York, and Seattle. If I look at Hong Kong's skyline, there really isn't much of one. It's just so dense that you don't really get to pick apart any distinct features. It's just a whole bunch of towers that are in a line with a couple of standout bits. I do really like the standout towers, and that's something that I want to make sure to keep in mind as I create my skyline, but I do think that we can come down and have a little bit less dense of a skyline than all of this from Hong Kong. If I look at the Seattle skyline, you can see that the tallest building over here, Columbia Center, plus the second and third tallest buildings right in the middle, and the Space Needle kind of set the scene, where you have these taller buildings poking out, and then a little bit of medium height stuff in the middle. You can still see through these towers, so it's not nearly as dense as it is in Hong Kong, but it definitely still feels quite urban. I think we can take a little bit of inspiration from how this comes up pretty rapidly at one end, bows down slightly, comes back up, and then tapers its way slowly down until you hit the Space Needle. Space Needle is really a prominent point, so are these super tall buildings, but everything else is kind of right in the middle. If you look at the skyline of New York City, you can see that it's actually also fairly interesting, where on one end you have a whole bunch of skyscrapers. This is your main area of downtown, but then you have everything tapering down a whole lot where the density just fades away before you end up at the southern tip where there's all this new development and more higher buildings, especially around the financial district. In that main area, there's again that same trend of just super tall buildings where everything else is somewhat around the same height with slightly different architectural styles. And I think that's something we can generally loosely replicate, where the tallest buildings are just total icons. Beautiful, setting the scene of the skyline and anchoring it at 2 different heights, while everything else in the middle is just all around there. Finally, I want to introduce a new contender to this, Toronto. Toronto is something that I think we're going to be taking a little bit more inspiration from as we continue to develop our downtown area, because it has some really cool ports and the way that it treats the waterfront is really nice. But here in Toronto, you can see that the skyline is a little bit more of a valley, or a little bit more of a mountain, where it slowly tapers off to both ends, comes up to the highest point in the middle, and tapers off on the other side, with the CN Tower, of course, being a big focal point. So if I now come back to our City Skylines 2 game, we can begin to think about how our skyline will also shape out for us. I think I really want a few anchor buildings for us. I know that I want our big spire building here in the Civic Center, which is going to be way in the distance over here. So I think I want to keep either side of that clear so we get a nice view of that straight from the ocean. That feels doable to me, seeing as that's right along this arterial and there's this highway interchange in the middle. Doesn't really make sense to have a huge amount of density over here. I think I want to have really big, tall skyscrapers on either end of our downtown. One here in the Marina District, kind of like how the Freedom Tower in New York City sets the stage for the south end of downtown in the Financial District. I think I can really model this Marina District off of the Financial District, where you have these old, tall, historic buildings, a few newer towers, but very historic, kind of tall-ish buildings, tapering off to slightly lower buildings on either end. Then up here, I think we'll probably want to have like our Imperial Tower, which is kind of like the Empire State Building's role in New York City, where it sets the scene for the north area of downtown. It's super tall. It kind of stands out, but there's still quite a lot of tall buildings all around it. That said, I know we have our shorter buildings all over to this side where the Old Town area is, so we're going to need to taper off our density somewhat quickly as we make our way down from this Imperial State Building. Now with these three main icons, I think we need to have at least one more somewhere around here. So maybe we'll have another pretty big tall tower with everything kind of in the middle, just filling in the gap. I also want to make sure that it's nice and dense, so there's not really any major points where you can see straight through downtown. I want to make sure we have just enough skyscrapers that when you look at it from the water, it looks like a full and proper city, but it still has enough tapering down of buildings on both ends that it doesn't feel like there's just too much growth or too little. So if we take this beautiful, beautiful drawing of mine back into the actual game, then we can start to think about where our signature buildings want to go. I mentioned that we have this Imperial State Building, and I wonder if that wants to go somewhere over here. Maybe we'll call it the Waters Building, as something that actually informed the naming of this whole area as the Waters District. The pond, the water, and the Waters Building. Then on this end, I think we want to have whichever our tallest building of all, which I think is the Skyline Palace, which is 500 meters tall. Just a huge building. And I think that actually fits right into here where the street grid breaks almost perfectly. Love it. We're of course going to want to have our observation tower back here in the Civic District, which coming from downtown, since that's up on a hill, is probably roughly the same height as these other two monuments, but I still think, as I mentioned, we need one downtown. So maybe that can be this pretty cool shaped peony tower. Maybe that'll set the scene perfectly. It also has a helipad on top, so we'll make sure that none of the buildings around it get quite up to the same height. With those buildings in, I then want to head into Find It and start to filter for residential, commercial, and office buildings that are all high density, so that we can start to fill in this whole area with some different sized buildings. While this one's a little bit taller and narrow, this is a little bit shorter. This one is pretty tall and a cool shape, but might be a little bit too Asian inspired for our city. Plus we've got a whole bunch of similar offices and residential buildings to think of. Thinking about our mix of uses downtown, I want to make sure that we have lots of commercial and lots of office with just a little bit of residential. Now I'm doing this for two reasons. One of them is a little bit of realism. In the real world, there's only a certain amount of residential downtown, but it's very office dominated, but mostly just for the simulation of the game. I want to turn downtown into a destination so we get a lot of traffic from people coming in and out of it from the airport or from their homes. I don't really want downtown to be self-contained 15-minute city type of thing. Maybe we'll do that in other parts of the map, but I want downtown to be somewhere that gets a whole lot of traffic in the morning commutes, so I want to emphasize that with a whole bunch of office buildings. With all that considered, I'll be right back with you once I have a few more of these skyscrapers plopped in. Et voila, we've got a skyline. Yes, you can see how this somewhat relates to my initial drawing. We had the Imperial Tower, the Peony Tower, the Observation Tower, and the Skyline Palace, and they're kind of serving as our foundations for downtown. But then we've got a little bit of density taper where it comes back down, 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 as you make your way to lower Old Town. You've got these little valleys between these bigger major monuments. You've got some more historic, older, tall buildings here in the Marina District, while the Central Business District is very office-dominated, and the Waters District is our very mixed-use area with shops, hotels, residential, and offices. I did add one more major super tall tower over here, and that's the Watanabe Tower, which is the signature high-density North American tower. And I added this in kind of reminiscent of Billionaire's Row in New York City, where you would least expect it, where there used to be no super tall towers, there's now this really big one. If we move this out of the way, you can see just how much of an impact that one tower has on our skyline. Where over here, it feels kind of bland and empty. This feels like what might have been a more historic skyline. These towers set the scene, and then this one just comes in and just destroys everything that we would imagine and creates a whole new super high area. I like it. I like it. I like it. You'll also notice that I have two peony towers. That's because this is the actual peony tower that we placed down together, and then I also took an extra one from the static ploppables to give us this really cool dual towers look. I know, don't even start with the jokes. Don't even. We've got this dual tower look right here with these super cool modern curved towers, and I really like it. Oh, my game crashed. Anyway, back to my explaining. Everything all around these big tall skyscrapers is basically trying to taper off the density, whether that's tapering off within the city or tapering off as you get closer to the waterfront. You can see that our waterfront is a lot lower density, but then it quickly ramps up as you get slightly deeper into the city. Same thing over here, and same thing out the back of the Marina District, although the backside is a little bit taller just because the Skyline Palace is right up against the edge. Now, all of these buildings are set to change once we start to actually develop our downtown. I want to go block by block and start to think about what each of these uses are, but that is for future episodes, plural. That's going to be a multi-episode project. At least for now, we've got the starts of our buildings in. We've got a whole bunch of parking lots, just like a true American city, so we can start to see how much parking is going to be needed. We've got some buildings that have helipads, presumably for all of the rich people that take their own private helicopter into those areas. So I made sure to keep the density in mind all around these buildings with helicopters. Like here we have the fire headquarters, so all the buildings around there are lower. A couple of other things to point out. Here I have the UK Parish Church, which is something that I noticed in the financial district of New York City. You've got these super tall buildings, and in the middle of all that, you just got a small little church. So I placed this down. Across the road is the French College, but the French asset pack is broken for me. So it's just a big white box right now, and I'll have to figure that out in the future. I placed this financial center signature building right on the tip of the island because it has this super cool atrium. So I thought no better place to place that than somewhere with the best of all the views. Plus it has a helipad up top, so I couldn't place it right next to the Skyline Palace. If we take a look at our zoning map over here, this is basically what a city zoning map looks like, where you have different parcels, each with their own land uses in here. You can see that not everything is residential. There are some major residential buildings. You can see we've got Colossal Tower over there, the Watanabe Tower that I mentioned earlier there, plus a few others. A lot of them are empty right now, but you can see there is a pretty good amount that is just housing. It's these green buildings plus some of these darker black buildings. These are all some variant of housing. We've also got a pretty good number of commercial buildings all sprinkled throughout here as well. Some of these black buildings are still not occupied, but a lot of the blue ones are beginning to fill up with some businesses. We've got no industrial buildings in our downtown. Those are all over here in the industrial district. And the most dominant building type of all are the offices, but as you can see, they're mostly still black. Maybe YouTube compression doesn't handle this super well, so you might not be able to tell the difference between the blacks and the grays, but the blacks are mostly unoccupied. There are a few that are starting to gain the businesses that they need, but just looking from above, offices are our dominant use downtown, followed by residential, thirdly commercial, and zero industrial. Generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out, but a couple of really major issues that I need to figure out how to fix. First off, it's just too shallow. I mentioned this while planning out the downtown grids, but this whole area is just too shallow. You can see straight through the skyline over here to the distance beyond, and that just doesn't feel right. It feels like you need to see a lot more city in there somewhere. The problem is, right behind this building over here, we have a highway interchange, so we can't place buildings there, and then we have this super steep mountain. And this terrain is going straight up behind our downtown, so to cut into that is going to be a lot of work. Then we also have these peony towers over here, but right behind them, there's just nothing besides a small little lake that's already kind of fading away. It's super tiny. So what I think that I want to do is I want to actually cut into this mountain over here. Now this is going to look really bad. I'm just going to reload the save after I do this on camera because I want to put a little more thought into it. But I think I need to cut into this mountain over here and effectively use that land to fill up this lake. This is basically going to create a couple of new parcels for us. It's going to extend our central business district back into as far back into this hill as we could possibly go. And it's going to create this whole new hillside district for us that serves not just to deepen our downtown and give a lot more locations for skyscrapers for ourselves so that we have a better skyline, but it's also going to create some essential connections between downtown and Greater Grand Central. So we actually have more links coming up the hill than this one Green Street to Hawthorne Street roundabout over here. This is going to create some really valuable circulation patterns all around Valley Hill for us. Now, this would be considered a very major project. This would be something that the downtown would undergo when they realized that they were running out of parcels for big high-rises down here, so they started to just deepen it. It's something that you would expect to see done maybe in the mid to early 1900s. In Seattle in the 1920s to 30s, there was this hill called Denny Hill right in our downtown. It's a pretty sizable hill, and they had a lot of houses built up on it. But the city effectively flattened the entire thing to create what's now basically a South Lake Union Queen Anne district, and they used all of that land to infill in some of the wetlands where we now have some of our rail, and these pictures looked kind of crazy. You know, they basically just took the hill back section by section, blasted out a large part of the terrain, and industrialized the entire thing. And you get some pretty silly pictures like this house way up on stilts at its original height. But the outcome is that you've got these roads stretching through here. Look at this. This is like a City Skylines 2 picture. Big roads stretching right through in straight lines as if the terrain never existed. For our part here in City Skylines 2, I don't want to get rid of Olive Valley Hill. I think that would be just a little bit absurd. It's a little bit too tall compared to the Denny Hill. The Denny Hill would probably be more comparable with this guy here in the Waters District. But I do think pushing the hill back slightly is something that is feasible as long as it gets terrained and blasted up and kept a little bit more safe. So I'm going to start to do a little bit of this terraforming, and I'll be right back with you once we've got a little bit more depth in our downtown. Alright, terraforming not quite done, but in progress. You can see that I've started to create a little bit of a ledge all around the hill where we can eventually have some roads that encircle it a little bit more safely. That would really be the boundary. And I've got a little bit more hillside right in between our downtown that we had before and this actual hill, so we can actually run things through here. The lake is now gone. I've started to add our first grid into there before we start to bring it up the hill, and it's just about time to start adding buildings. I want to bring Alyssa Street up this hill and set that as our big pass-through to get all the way into Greater Grand Central over here. Then maybe have some smaller roads that branch off of there for some row houses, and of course connect into Foggy Street, Green Street, all these other connections wherever we can. It's going to be a little bit complicated to work around the subway line, but I think it's all doable. So let's do that. And there we go. We got a little bit of a hillside district. Now the terraining still needs a little bit of work. It's gotten a little bit steep and we've really blasted out this back area. I might want to add a key wall right here along the backs of these houses or something like that. But hey, it's a start. And you can see that while this is up a hillside, it doesn't actually look too bad. And that's because we've used a lot of townhomes. This is probably something that was created at the same time as the whole regrade when townhomes was really the whole density of the city, and they just haven't gotten to upzoning this whole district yet because it's on such a steep hill. I did place in a couple of more higher density buildings just to start to fill in the skyline, so now when we look at our skyline like this, that is a lot deeper. There are still a couple of points that you can see through, but the majority of these gaps have now been filled in by a couple of other high density buildings all around here that really start to help our case. I've also got, as I mentioned, this road that comes up and curves its way through here to connect up with Greater Grand Central, plus a couple of other street grids that just snake their way all around here. I like how this district is feeling. I like that we got rid of the lake. The terraining is all somewhat reasonable, and we still have room up on this hillside as we begin to grow Western Heights. Pretty good. We've also got a little bit of a park, because I think downtown is lacking in parks, so I placed a couple of those in there, and that's something that I want to think about further. I also wanted to highlight, I don't know if we had this in the last clip already, but I've got some buildings in Nodo as well. These are also on a hillside, and I could fill in the gaps over here with some row homes that will bridge this terrain height a little bit better. But we've got some parks and an elementary school. I put in our elevated subway station and just started to add a couple of buildings that really focus on tapering off the density. If you look at it from the side, it's not a huge taper because the hill is coming on up, but it is just coming down from these big, tall buildings all around here to something that's a little bit more park scale as you get closer to this roundabout and this whole infrastructure, low-density area over here. I think this also works when you're coming from this side of the hill. These buildings just fit right into the skyline. Everything just kind of works. I like it. I do think this is about as far as we'll get on the downtown skyline for this episode, because we're going to need to go block by block and really develop things further. But at least for a starting point, this is pretty good. I really like how it's starting to feel along the waterfront. We'll of course have to add in all sorts of piers and all that, but it's a good start to how it feels on the water, how it feels as a skyline, how it feels from behind. Everything is great so far. Final thing I want to do as part of this downtown development is to draw out a couple of the roads here in the East Asian Cultural District. We'd already started to create the street grid in the last couple episodes as we developed the industrial area and Greater Grand Central. You can see that while I plopped down these buildings in downtown, I also started to place a couple of signature buildings, or a couple of flagship buildings all throughout these districts. I placed Fashion Square over here, signifying that I want this to turn into some sort of a mall shopping area. Then I placed an elementary school and a college over here in the East Asian Center. These are really Asian inspired and looking assets, and I think they set the flagship for this district really well. This is something that I want to develop in future episodes a lot more, but at least for now, it's a good start to have those in there. The thing that's lacking is this whole East Asian Cultural District over here. So what I want to do is have some of these roads of this X come down to this roundabout over here, or cul-de-sac over there, maybe connect up to Fawn Street over there, although the grade is a little steep, and probably work our way around this subway stop right over here to make their way up the grade and fill in the rest of the area with some row homes, perhaps. So the first step to all of this is beginning to draw in a couple more roads, and I just added a little bit of a stub right here around the subway station. So you can see while the subway station is already up here, it looks like it's just about ready to serve this whole hilltop area and a little bit of connections down to the whole rest of downtown in this corner over here. I added a little bit of a road so that that can sneak its way right underneath the subway tracks with just barely enough clearance. And it can start to make its way up this hill. I think we want to remove this little bump and just smooth it out as we go up there. And I'm back with a little bit of an update. Instead of doing that, the grade was just a little bit too steep, so I actually drew in a pedestrian path and instead focused on linking up this grade over here with the X up there. So now we have an alternative pathway. This is where it really snakes up the street in a steeper way. The smoother way would be to come from Grand Central and make your way up the slow, longer road. But if you want a quick cut through, you can take Hemlock Street right up to the top of the X, and there you go. And then on the other side, I brought a branching road off down to the cul-de-sac as we talked about. I kept this alley that we had all the way through here, and I just added a couple branching off ones. These are going to be great for zoning in some of our row homes, and I brought Bedford Lane right through as a connection because our subway track then ends its key segment and turns into an elevated segment, so I brought Bedford Lane right under there, and we can start to fill in this whole area with row homes before we have a little green belt and our mall. Now we've got these extra blocks. It's something that maybe I'll leave empty for today's episode, but as we start to develop the East Asian Cultural District more, we can think about it a little bit further. I also placed down another few buildings here. I don't know if we'll keep them, but I placed down the large city park right here next to our metro stop because I think that they complement each other quite well. I placed down the huge plaza over here. I might want to move this, honestly, as a reminder to myself that I want to have a lot of park space all throughout this district. And finally, I placed down the Grand Dynasty Hotel over here behind our campsite on this pier because I think it sets the scene quite well. I love how it looks on the waterfront just like that. Now that we've completed a little bit more development in our downtown area, it's time to move on to developing Greater Grand Central. As I mentioned in the intro, I want this to be a master planned tourism-centric area. We have the Stadium District right over here, right next to this, which is going to be very tourism-centric. Plus, Grand Central is going to be where a lot of the tourists come in from the Airport Express, from any regional connections and all that. So this area is going to need to be very hotel focused. It's already got its main interchanges and connections to I-67, the highway, so we really just need to begin to draw out some of the roads in here. I think I want to center the roads of this district all around some sort of park. I could do a big square park, but I'm really envisioning something circular. Maybe the Park Cafe, that feels a little small. Ring Park also feels a little small. I wonder if there's something that's new. Ooh, a landmark? Oh, the Fountain Plaza. Oh yeah, the Fountain Plaza is a perfect centerpiece for this district. I feel like it could be cool to place it over here and kind of the elbow of the subway tracks, but I don't think the angles are working out for me. So if I place it right over here, then I can route all of our major roads into there. Maybe I can place it right at an angle off of our subway station right here. Yeah, imagine that. Oh, that's gonna look good. Oh yeah, just like that. This is great. Look at this, we got a little bit of a roundabout. I think I actually need to switch these to one-way roads so it's an actual roundabout rather than it just being this weird circular road. But hey, this is a start to defining our district. I just brought that straight out from right where Grand Central aligns, so we get this nice straight passage right through this whole area. And I've had the Fountain Plaza plopped right in the middle over there where we have enough space for other blocks around in every direction. I also took those roads that we had around this elevated subway station and brought them out in a form of a couplet until it comes into our roundabout right over here. So now we've got 6 different roads all feeding into this roundabout, which I think really adds some purpose to it. We're using the largest roundabout here, I believe, so it is just as big as it can possibly get, and I kind of love it. It might need a little bit of move it work because some of this pavement work and some of these sidewalks are a little bit glitchy, and it's not the cleanest of roundabouts, but I like how it feeds in. I also took the tram line that we had running through here, brought it over these 2 roads with, again, just barely enough clearance, and then brought it underneath this subway track with more barely enough clearance. Trams can do a little bit steeper of a grade, so they come in right there, and right underneath the subway line we have this intersection right here where it goes from a 6-lane road out the roundabout into the typical 4-lane plus tram road that we have running through the rest of the area. Now it's time to draw in the rest of the street grid. I probably want to have some road that parallels roughly this hillside that we got right here, draw in a couple of blocks probably in parallel with the rest of the downtown grid that we've got running through here, and bring this 4-lane road Olive Street from downtown all the way through the district just to see where it all interacts. And all of that done looks just like this. You can see I brought that 4-lane road in, but it didn't really make sense to have that cut through over here because then we'd have this really awkward block. So it comes in and turns in at a 90 down Glade Street, which is right at the base of the subway station, not too close, far enough apart that we have just enough room and so that our blocks are all roughly the right size in line with our downtown grid that we've got. And we've got this road over here on the opposite side, which parallels the hillside, gives us just enough room for some building uses around here, but doesn't result with any too tight of blocks besides this one right here. This district is coming together. It definitely feels a little bit more master planned, especially with this big old roundabout right down the center. So I think the next step for me is going to start to be placing in some buildings. I think a big goal is going to be to place in hotels throughout this district, because as I mentioned, this is really a center for tourism next to the Stadium District and next to Greater Grand Central and all of downtown. So we probably want to have a couple of hotels all throughout here. I also want to focus on adding a whole bunch of signature buildings wherever we can. And ooh, there are these guys from the Mediterranean pack that look like they might fit together just perfectly. So I wonder if I can squeeze these into this block over here and have that framed out really well right there. Oh, that'll be so nice. So I'm again just going to go through our signature buildings list, plop down some hotels, maybe some pubs, see where things fit all together. And I'll be back with you right now. And here we are, got a whole bunch of signature buildings plopped in here. First off, I got the city shopping mall. I know that I'm going to use this East Asian Cultural District up here as a bit of a mall, but I don't think this city shopping mall really fits in down there, given its more blocky nature, its height. So I thought this would be a pretty good fit for Greater Grand Central, where there's not really a defined stylistic theme, and where you get a little bit more of these tourism-based buildings. Just like these residences over here from the Mediterranean Heritage Pack, which, as I was showing before, fit almost perfectly into one another. I love how these fit in together. It creates a couple of nice plazas on either end of the block, but overall it's just this super nice building, which as you're driving down any of these streets, just frames the whole plaza so nicely. I mean, look at this. I swear, I could just sit right here and watch this fountain and look at these buildings and the wind turbine in the background all day. I love this. I placed down a couple of other hotels around here, like the 2-Star Country Hotel, random EU commercial ones, Hotel Polonaise, 5-Star Hotel, the Sunshine Hotel, and the North American Commercial Hotel, among a couple of others. I also want to, as a tourism district, make sure that this has plenty of shopping areas, so I placed down this bookshop right across from the train station, because architecturally this train station has some nice little wood accents right there, so I figured having this more woody building right across the road would make a little bit of sense. Behind that I have the Passage Park because it kind of fits right into this block, not perfectly, but pretty good. I've also got the Square Center over here, which is a fashion shopping area. I'll probably put some sort of open plaza space right here so we kind of start to get a green belt running through here. I also like how this building is a 4-sided asset, so I don't want to cover up this nice side over here. And we've got the Heath Pub over here from the UK pack, which just starts to round out this corner, continues a little bit of the Mediterranean coloring trend that we've got around this circle, but it's not really hinting at anything in particular. Overall, I think this is about as far as I want to get with this district for this episode. In future episodes, we're going to develop it further, but I want to think a little bit more about this district. It's something that I want to plan out with a lot of deliberateness, thinking a lot about open spaces and how all the roads and everything interconnect with each other. I already have this passage park over here. I know I want open space over there. This little plaza probably lends itself to an open space, as does this one. So do these two areas around this Mediterranean building. There might just be a lot of open space in this district, and I have to figure out how we want to mitigate that with the amount of density that we want. With all that said and done, we've completely transformed our downtown this episode. So before we end the episode for the day, it's time to round out the video with some cinematics. Welcome back after some beautiful, as always, cinematics. I'm having so much fun incorporating these as part of my episodes now. I love just seeing how much has changed over the course of an episode, and this episode has had so much change. We've developed our entire downtown and started a new region, and honestly, this episode was filled with just starting projects. Nothing is finished. All of these buildings are still subject to change and placeholder buildings, but I do love how we now have some semblance of a downtown, we have some semblance of a skyline, and as we're developing the surrounding regions in the upcoming episodes, we can begin to think about how each of these parts relates to the skyline and relates to the city. With all that said, we've done a lot this episode, the episode's running a little bit long, and it's time for the video to come to an end. So I'll see you all in the next episode, and I thank you all for watching. Bye-bye!